Like to welcome you to another episode of the Healthcare Leadership Excellence Podcast. Delighted to have you with us today. And I am extremely excited. Of course, I always am because we have great guests. But today we have someone who has played on both sides of the fence. MD, PhD, native to the Northwest, now lives in the deserts of Arizona in around the Tucson area. And in our pre-call, this individual and I had a blast with a lot of different ideas about what makes the leadership world really function. And what I like about our guest is, as I said, both sides of the fence. MD, PhD does not come cheap. You've got to be at a certain level to be able to attain that. And yet she also brings in emotional intelligence, which is a key. So I would just so delighted to welcome Dr. Carla Fowler to our show today. Doctor, thanks for being with us.
Carl, thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I loved our pre-call, and I'm just really excited to talk about interesting ideas today and good tools and tips that we can all use.
So bring us up to speed on what brings, and to our listeners, I'm not being disrespectful. She did let say that I could call her Carla. So I am all the years you spent earning that MD, I'm just going to go use your first name. So Carla, tell us what brings you to us today, what your path has been to where you are.
Yeah, well, as you pointed out, over the course of my career have done a number of different things, and that may just speak a little bit to my personality. I'm just a really interested learner, and I love multidisciplinary thinking. And so my path to today, obviously, as you pointed out, started with completing my MD PhD at the University of Washington. So part of their medical scientist training program. And I, even from my days in undergrad, was interested in immunology. So back in like 1999, I took an immunology class and realized like that was going to be the future. Like it was going to be useful in diagnostics, in therapeutics, in like even the disease states that come from the immune system itself. And so during my MT PhD, I pursued an immunology PhD and worked on cancer immunotherapy. And again, that sort of innovative cutting edge was pretty interesting to me. So following the MSTP program, I went matched at Stanford, did my intern year in general surgery. It turns out I also loved learning procedures. So both the thinking piece of medicine, but also really what was that active physical component of medicine. And so I really, over the course of that was about a 10-year period, got exposed to really different camps in medicine. So both the proceduralists, but also the really kind of academic thinkers, right? Like in the scientific component, the University of Washington is really known for its patient-centered care. So I also got a lot of exposure to just how to be a human being as a doctor and how to be a human being with your patients. And so fast forward now, I'm in my intern year of general surgery and, definitely have done a lot of work to get to that point, but really started to have some questions about whether continuing forward at that moment where I was at with medicine and whether, I was totally clear that that was what I wanted at that moment. And I think I had enough questions in my mind. And I also had some other interest areas that I made a major pivot. So I sort of told my program I was going to finish the year, but wasn't going to continue on, and they should fill my spot. And decided that I needed to do some work on my own around more of the kind of leadership and or performance elements of doing anything hard. And this included both thinking within medicine, but also in any industry. That leadership and how we perform at a high level as that is getting harder and as there's more uncertainty is a really interesting question to me. It certainly came up at multiple moments during my training. And so I actually left to build a practice. It wasn't a psychological practice per se, but to build a coaching practice. And so that was 12 years ago. And I really wanted to incorporate performance science into it. So, really use the best ideas and data we have to say what helps us in leadership? What are the things that matter? And what are all the different disciplines that impact how we lead? And that's everything from, strategy to execution and productivity to mindset and psychology to physiology. And so I built a practice, and that was 12 years ago, and have been totally geeking out on performance science and working with awesome leaders across industries. And that kind of brings us to today.
Marvelous. So your last comments there segue right into my first question. And this may take us the entire hour, Carla. But you just mentioned the four buckets of leadership: strategy, execution, mindset, and biology, physiology.
Yeah.
Um, let's dig in because like you said, geeking out. Um, the medical community, and I'm delighted with this, they are best practice data driven.
Hmm.
And if I'm talking warm, fuzzy, fluffy stuff, that lasts about 2 minutes. But you
Hmm.
come in with an MD, PhD background of being a scientist. Talk to us in as much depth as you want to about those four buckets and how they hit high performance, because we're not seeing a lot of high performing right now.
Yeah. Well, and I would say the context in which we are trying to perform has also gotten more challenging. So this is a great question, Carl, and we'll try and keep it at a level that's really useful for folks. But one of the reasons that when I started out, I actually tried to segment leadership and high performance in leadership was because there's not a one size fits all. And as I know you know and are familiar with in your work, uh, you come into a variety of different scenarios and have leaders in a variety of different scenarios with different strengths. And I like the idea of in performance, there's not just one solution to a problem, that there are often different angles of approach. And I like that because when we're leading and operating in different kinds of challenging situations, um, we need more options and we need to get our brain to get out of sort of tunnel thinking and to be able to say, well, what is the right approach for me or for this particular issue or problem? And so that allows us, when we start to segment things, to say, well, is the answer to this challenge that we're dealing with, is there a strategic angle we should approach it from? And what I mean by that is we often overcomplicate strategy, but strategy is sort of having clarity and some alignment with whatever are the stakeholders about what is it we're actually aiming at? What's the goal here? What is our most important goal? And then secondarily, what do we think are actually the most important levers or priorities that we are going to invest in that give us the best shot at reaching that goal? Like rarely are things 100%. There's always some risk involved, but um, what are we going to focus on as we go after that goal? And so sometimes when we're coming into something, we have to say, all right, we're going to give up on this stuff because we think this stuff is actually more important and we don't have the resources to do it all. So, how might we prioritize? So, that's when I think about strategy, that's an important piece of performance because, particularly in medicine, but across all industries, people are burned out. Leaders are burned out. We also have resource constraints. And that's where learning to sort of brutally focus okay, we don't get everything we want. We don't have all the time we want. So, what do we really want and how are we going to go after it? And that's what strategy has to really do with performance and the kinds of places where strategy might be an important angle when we're burnt out, when we're resource constrained. Um, so that's bucket one. I'll pause there.
Well, a quick sub question here.
Yeah.
There are so many different definitions of strategy. How would how does Carla define strategy? Because I
Yeah.
dealing with nurses that are brand new at the bedside, we'll get to that in a second. A young physician who is now section head just because it was his turn and has no idea about leadership. And what is strategy? How would you define that for us?
This is such a good question because I do think we overcomplicate it. And sometimes we mix up the form and the function. Like we think strategy is the 50-page booklet that we generated at our annual retreat. That is one form of strategy. um, I like to simplify it because I work with a number of people who are new in leadership in that situation and feel like they're supposed to be doing something. So I like to simplify it to say, you want to think more strategically, the first thing I recommend is just to give yourself even 10 minutes, right? We're like let's make this very doable. That taking a 10-minute pause where you're not answering email, you're not answering texts, where you think about, let's say, one element of what you're trying to accomplish, and you say, what would success look like? How would I define success at that thing? What would feel successful? What would look successful? Um, what is that goal we have in this particular area? And what do I think, or what's the list of things that might be the most important priorities to drive us there? Not all the things, although sometimes it's very useful in that 10 minutes to list all the things you can think of and then go back for a second pass and be like, okay, that's not as good as that one. That's not as good as that. And you can kind of float three or four of them to the top. But strategy is basically saying, what are the few potent things we're going to try to do to hit that goal that we want to achieve? And recognizing that there are a ton of things you're not going to do. And at its simplest, doing a little 10-minute exercise to say, even in a particular situation, to just say, what's my goal out of this situation? It could even be a hard conversation you're going to have with someone. Just say, what's my goal? And what do I think is going to be most important for me to focus on during that conversation, for example, that is most likely to produce the outcome I want? Not guaranteed, but it gives me my best shot. And so I like this 10-minute strategy exercise because strategy doesn't have to be complicated, but it's having clarity about what do you want and what is most important to do to get that.
So we go from strategy, and I imagine you could write a book, Carla, on the death the death rate of great strategies because people don't execute well. So talk to us a bit about the talents of execution, because we hear
Yeah.
about innovative thinking and disruptive thinking,
Yeah.
but there's got to be people who carry forth that great idea, and sometimes it's not the people who come up with the idea.
100%. I agree with that entirely because we need multidisciplinary groups of people who lead and who are good at different things.
So go
Yeah.
into the need for execution and what some of the key steps are to make sure the brilliant thinking sees the light at the end of the tunnel.
hmm So I think about execution as having a couple key characteristics that we can ask ourselves, are we prepared for these characteristics? And then we can also think about how to improve upon them. So one of the most important things is to start to think about, okay, we have the priorities, like the things that we think we're going to be investing in, but then you have to translate that into some concrete how, right?
Mhm.
And so I think one of the first things is to have clarity on what do we think the how of executing on this looks like. And there are a couple of different questions you could ask yourself to help determine what that how looks like. One of them is, what are our capabilities? So looking at the team that's going to execute and saying, well, what do they have the capability to do? And that includes, what do they have the capability to learn? So it's
Mhm.
not just like, what can you do now, but also how could that team develop into being able to run or execute the tactical of this thing. Another important question is a little bit about culture and values. So it's this idea that you can have a team that is capable of executing the vision, and maybe you've translated it into some concrete steps. But there's also talking with the team that is going to execute it is really important because they often have some ideas about, well, this is how we'd like to go about it because we know it will land better, with the departments we're going to work with, for example, or even thinking about the change management of pushing an idea forwards. Often innovation, different things, they require change. And so I think it's often very important that they have some influence, or that that team can take into account what is the culture of where we're going. So even the visionary person might be like, this is where we're going and these are the priorities. That's great. We need that. But that execution team needs to have some influence.
And so, yeah, this is, we could spend the next 40 minutes on this one because it's been my experience that a lot of people that are high functioning thinkers have no concept that the rest of the world is not at their level. I work with one individual that has an MD, PhD from two of the best universities in the world. And but she's humble. And she can't get the picture that she thinks at this stratospherically high level, and she'll give her spiel and then get blindingly upset with her team that can't execute her plan. So can you give a short explanation of how to, I don't want to say dumb down because that's condescending, but how can these brilliant strategists help the execution team think at their level?
This is a great question. And my one word answer, and then I'll elaborate, is dialogue. So
Excellent.
communication is a two-way process, and often, very brilliant people are good at thinking about problems, like asking questions about the world. And one of the things that you can tie into that is to say, can you be curious about the people who are going to be executing and what they see? Like almost using them as a lens through which to look through the world. And so, um, some of the things that I would recommend is, as you're explaining, the first piece is maybe you're explaining your vision. And then I think it's often helpful to ask a question like, you know, what did you hear or understand from that ties into something you've done before, or even if you haven't done it before, that you're like, oh, we see how we could do that. What pieces made sense? What pieces didn't make sense? Or what questions do you have about that? And then the key, of course, is when people ask questions, you have to like receive those questions with respect and with the spirit of we are collaborating to make this thing go. And generally, it's a big thing, which is going to require the collaboration and efforts of many people. And so that's my example of what does dialogue look like. It's being curious, it's asking questions, it's receiving those questions, not with a well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's to say, I wasn't clear about that. Which piece could use more clarity? And you can even have that calibration in the dialogue, and then try again, right? Try to use some different words.
So back to our four buckets of leadership. And as
Yeah,
I look at the list, I think I probably wrote it down wrong because I have it strategy, execution, mindset, biology. Yet, as I look at it here as we're talking, I love the phrase, it's not original with me, that biology always beats psychology. So talk to us now in reverse order. We've got strategy and execution in my mind here as number 3 and 4. But talk
great.
to us about the biology that sets the base for
Yeah.
proper mindset change,
Hmm.
allows strategic thinking and execution. So fill us in there.
Yes, and you're correct, Carl, that these buckets all interact with each other. And so, but I love that you brought up biology because I think this one often gets missed. And yet, it's the platform on which you and I are thinking, making decisions, behaving every day. And we
Mhm.
hardly notice it. It's like this thing we think is in the background, but has kind of an outsized impact. So, uh, as as we learned a lot in medical school, we have all these hormonal axes that really impact how much stress are we feeling, Are we feeling revved up? Are we feeling calm? And we know that, for example, when we are very stressed, we have a fight or flight response. Its whole purpose is to focus and narrow our thinking to
Mhm.
survival. And we also know that, like, we have a system, um, which is our parasympathetic system, which is kind of our rest and digest. And we are sort of more open at those times. And then when we think about the different things that affect our biology, how much sleep we got the night before, are you hungry? Do you have something else in the rest of your life that is consuming your mental patterns, right? Like a conflict at home or something you're worried about. All of these things come into play into, where are we on that continuum of like rested, calm, open to fight or flight, narrow kind of thinking, like crisis moment. And notably, this does play into mindset because we actually know that it is, we now sort of know that it is okay to feel stress. So for a long time, I think there's been this message of like stress is bad for your health. And the truth is, it's more complex than that. Our bodies were made to have stress because that is how we survive in the world. But we probably don't want to be chronically stressed for long periods of time. And we also need to have the right beliefs and attitude systems about being stressed. So, what we
Mhm.
believe about stress, we now know has some impact on whether the hormones are sort of inflammatory or whether they help us do things like learn, connect with other people, and rise to the challenge. So, our biology is worth thinking about. And so, in leadership, and as we think about our performance, some of the things I recommend are number one, creating mindsets that help our stress be processed in a good way in our bodies matters. And so, what that looks like is often having some purpose to things that are stressful. So, for example, it is absolutely stressful to respond to a code, like in the ER. And yet, how we think about it to say, yeah, it was stressful and we all had to be there. And yeah, we yelled at each other a little bit. But the whole purpose of that was we were trying to save someone's life and they came in a really bad way.
Yeah.
Um, but to be able to come down from it and maybe even debrief and to be like, that was really stressful. But we came together and that stress was worth it because of the job we do here, for example.
Mhm.
Or, we work together well as colleagues. And yeah, that was stressful for you. That was stressful for me too. We can agree. We can bond over that. Um, but so our mindset actually shifts whether that stress is just kind of inflammatory or whether it helps us connect, whether it helps us like kind of learn and have purpose in our lives.
Mhm.
So the mindset piece of stress and that biology matters. But other things I often recommend to people are to say, how do we create habits in our lives that allow us to not stay revved up for too long? And so
Mhm.
these are ongoing habits. One doesn't need to do all of them, but some great examples are paying attention to sleep when that is feasible. Obviously, if you're working a 24-hour shift, you're probably not sleeping that much, but thinking about how you catch up on that. But things like meditation, even if you're, a little down on sleep, we know that doing some breathing practices, having moments that calm our system do matter. Um, Having a good social support network,
Mhm.
having some movement, getting some daylight. These are all different kinds of habits that help people manage stress over the long term and manage that biology.
Got
Um,
it.
yeah.
So, how people process and think. Let's jump to that. We
Hmm.
noted in the pre-call, and you noted before we went live today about that incredible work by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Talk to us because I joke with people, Carla, that I can get usually through half to three quarters of my day without thinking because
Yeah.
I,
Muscle
I'm,
memory.
I'm exactly that mental muscle memory of, and not in a bratty way, but in been there, done that. Okay, here's
Hmm.
this, I'm doing this. And a lot of people are very polished at reacting well.
Yes.
They don't really have to think. And yet, when we ask them about how they do think, it's this deer in the headlights of I've never
Yeah.
that question. So dig in here for us from again that scientific background. How do effective leaders think? And what are some of the errors new leaders make in thinking? So, three questions. How do great leaders think? What are the errors of thinking that many leaders that aren't trained make? And just talk to us about what you found about the science of thinking. That may
Yeah.
sound fluffy, but and take those in any way.
Awesome. Well, I think what you brought up is important, that there is in fact a piece of high performance and frankly just being alive that Daniel Kahneman emphasized in his book, which is we need that reactive, fast thinking, the system one of thinking, because that's what like gets you out of the street when a car honks, keeps you alive. And so we need it to survive. It is not it is not bad thinking. And your point about you can get through a lot of your day without needing to dig deeply into a different system makes sense. And particularly in medicine, there is so much happening and there is such a body of knowledge that is required to be learned that we need that system one. Like we can't be digging into the complexities of something when the patient comes into the ER and is in an extreme condition. There needs to be that reaction time. And so it is not a bad thing that we recognize patterns, and recognizing patterns is part of what that system one does, and it saves us energy. Now, the challenge is that there's a lot of stuff that goes on in our brain that feels like thinking, but is sometimes it's complaining, sometimes it's just sort of reacting emotionally to something. Sometimes it's reacting to something meaty, but not realizing there's something different about it than what we thought it was. Right? We thought it was A, but it's actually B. And so obviously, we need this more complex system two thinking, which is slower thinking. So, system one prepares us to react in a good way to things we've seen before. The challenge is we're more and more, we are encountering new things every day, things that we haven't seen. And this happens with a world that is uncertain. And in those scenarios, our previous experiences or our heuristics won't necessarily help us. So, one of the things you don't know when that's going to happen. We can be going along reacting, and you can't know, you don't get an alert. Hey, this is a system two moment. So, what I find high performing leaders and thinkers do is they create space to take a pause from the reacting to do some thinking outside that. It's a little bit of thinking about the thinking, it's a little thinking at a higher level. And often it helps to have some prompts. And this is what I find leaders who do this will often use. So it makes sense to try and plan some time. So if listeners in the audience want to try and do this, it's planning some time when you're not interrupted. I often think having some prompts and a pad of paper, something that you can get your thoughts outside of your head, is really helpful so that you're not sort of spinning on stuff, but not actually getting clarity. Like the moment you have to translate something into language, it will actually become more clear in your brain. So I think writing as you're thinking is helpful. I also recommend prompts. So, for example, some helpful prompts people can use are what's taking most of my brain like right now? What's got my bandwidth? And that often clears. It might be something really important that is worth thinking more deeply about, but it also might just be the loudest, noisiest thing that's going on. So you can kind of write that down, clear that out. Then you can also ask the question, what is more important that maybe I should be thinking about, but I'm not? Like either I haven't had time for it, maybe it's something I've been avoiding, maybe it's something that is uncomfortable for me. Maybe it's what's coming down the track in the future that is not here yet, but I know it's coming for our department, or that I need that needs some time to think about because it doesn't have a simple answer.
Mhm.
And so I often find we can start to generate topics or ideas based on some of these questions, and that often it's sort of mapping out your brain a little bit. It's putting some order and seeing the thoughts as opposed to just riding the roller coaster of the thoughts.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And keep in mind, I find this myself as well as many leaders who use this technique. You're not going to have a big insight every time you sit down and do this. The doing it is the practice. And don't feel like you failed if you're like, Carla, I didn't get an amazing idea. I can guarantee you your brain benefited from slowing down, from looking at some of these things. And if you actually picked one and said, well, let me see if I can troubleshoot this a little bit. Like, what do I need to learn in this area? Who could I talk to about this thing that might be a useful resource? Um, what would a solution actually look like here? Or what is a distraction that actually we probably don't need to be thinking about? So
Mhm.
there's lots of different things you can get out of this.
And to those of our listeners who might be thinking, "Oh yeah, right. That's yeah, really?" Um,
Hmm.
my coach Carla back in 2017 suggested daily writing in
Yeah.
this. Um, and right here on my shelf, as I flip it over, this is pad number 69.
Awesome.
And every day for probably 10 to 15 minutes, I write. And what she
Hmm.
said is absolutely, it's been a complete game changer. It organizes thought, it crystallizes thought, it and it's almost like working out physically,
Yes.
that the more you do it,
Hmm.
then you see, wow, okay, there's a whole different area opening up to me because I've gone to the gym for a month in a row. And I
Yeah.
was hyper skeptical until my coach insisted that he wasn't going to talk to me anymore if I didn't do. And I still joke with him about it. Of okay, you were right, you were right. But to those skeptics out there, Dr. Fowler is not wrong on this one. Um, I want to shift gears here a bit. As you're aware, many times in medicine, because people have all the initials behind their name, we assume they're good leaders.
Hmm.
And so there's two people listening, hypothetically here, Carla, driving to work on the stair climb or on the exercise bike that have no idea at all how to lead.
Hmm.
But they've just been made the new assistant nurse manager, or maybe a
Hmm.
charge nurse, or maybe a section head just because it was his turn.
Yeah.
And no one has given them any leadership training. They have BSN, MSN, MD, PhD behind their name, so they can figure it out because leadership's not that hard, quote unquote.
Hmm.
Can you give some real specific take heart, don't give up? These are things you need to avoid. These are things that you should definitely put in practice, although every situation's different. Can you talk to these people that I know are listening, uh, that they can get off the bike or out of the car and think, okay, this could work today?
Yeah. Well, it's a big question, but I do have some ideas, some specific recommendations. One of the most important pieces of leadership that sets everything else up to be successful, because I know as a leader, like you have so many things that you think you should be doing that people are asking you to do. And I think it's often really helpful to come back to some fundamental things that set the stage. One of them is the power of clarity to yourself in your own brain and to be communicated to your team about like what are we aiming at and what is most important. And so this if it sounds familiar, it's because we're kind of referencing strategy, but not strategy 50-page booklet. We're just talking about aligning your team and motivating your team. And so I had a client early in my coaching days where I would always do sort of an initial strategy session with my clients. And it was just, we would take like 5 hours and we would just talk about everything that was important and try and understand what the goals were and what actually were the most important priorities. So do sort of an exercise to figure those things out. And we would distill it into a framework with, a big goal and 3 priorities and some sub bullets under those priorities. And I just worked with the leader and he was excited about the framework. He went back to his team and was able to share with his team, like, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's what I see the goal is. Here's what I think we need to be focused on. And his team got so excited because it turns out not only are you more effective at executing together and pulling in the same direction if you all actually understand what are we trying to do, and it's not just living in your head as a leader and you think it's clear to everyone, but it's probably not. They're not in your head. So not only was the leader now clear, he could communicate it to his team, but his team actually saw why they were important, where they were contributing, where their roles fit in. And they were like, now I know how to win here. I know how we can win as a team. And I see how we'll know if we're successful, as opposed to everyone's coming in every day, working really hard and not feeling like or knowing if we're making progress. And so this is my thought number one for leaders is it might be in your head, but until you write it down, you might not be totally clear, which means it's really hard to communicate it clearly to your team so they understand and know how to prioritize their time. But not just so they can be effective, so they also know why they matter and how they're contributing, which is critical to team motivation. And so that's why I think this principle punches above its weight, is because it will make you way more effective, but it also makes it more fun and more motivating. So even an hour spent trying to lay this out on a Post-it note, right? This is my vehicle of choice. And then having in one-on-ones with your team, even just running the rough draft, the V1, to say, does this make sense to you? What's not clear about it? What questions do you have? Okay, and then you can go back and do a V2. So you don't have to get it perfect. But this is one of my fundamental recommendations that I think any leader can execute right now and get that process started, that communication or dialogue started to create more clarity and motivation on their team.
Got it. What else?
All right. What else? Okay. So on the execution front, because often your team is actually doing a lot of that execution, I think that in terms of both motivating your team and making your team more effective, there are a couple of different elements to think about. And we talked about 2 of them already. One of them is capability. And that's both are people getting to use their capabilities and what they have to offer? So, for example, if someone is really excited about a particular quality project or something like that, and they have the background or the capability to do that, that's going to make them more effective and motivated. But also thinking a little bit about who could grow into something, how are you developing your team so they get more capabilities? Because when we as a contributor to a team feel like our skills are growing, we are way more satisfied at work. We are way more engaged at work. And again, we become a better team member. So capability is one thing. Visibility is another thing. So I think it's important that our teams have visibility, that they are seen and recognized for what they're doing and contributing. And so sometimes what that looks like is sharing with other departments, like how the folks who are executing what they're doing well, why they're doing it. So they're seen and recognized for that. The third thing is influence. So, how I said on our first point that you could do a V1 of the plan and then sit down and discuss it in 101s to say, what do you see here? What am I missing? What's not clear? That it feels good as an executing team to have some influence on the how and the what. And so I think finding moments where teams can give influence and giving that autonomy or that ability. That might be, hey, you're going to take charge on this project. You can tell me what your approach is. I'll probably ask some questions. I might have feedback, but you're going to drive it. Can feel really good. So those are some principles and some manifestations of what I think those look like as you're thinking about execution and how to help a team execute well.
So we're pulling to a close here, but one other question that I need you to look at.
Yeah.
High performers, well, highly educated, brilliant people sometimes don't, and I was discussing this with you beforehand, I think. Um, what would you say to that brilliant person who kind of um, negates the importance of culture? It's
Mm.
we're all smart, we all are accountable. Let's just do our jobs. Let's not get offended with each other. Let's not be, the oversensitive. What would you say to someone who says, "Yeah, the culture thing's overrated"?
Yeah. It's really interesting because I think there's a culture to everything. So I think often what that person is saying is they have a particular view of culture, and often that is the culture within, uh, let's say, the circles that have lots of letters after their names and how they do things and how they interact, and that there's almost an unspoken or unseen. Well, this is just how we do things. That's that person's view of how we do things.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I think that is important to point out is to be able to say it totally makes sense that resonates with you, like that that is motivating to you. It's the culture you came up through, right? Like I'll just use medicine as an example. You come through and no, you don't ask why. Generally, you're like, nope, you just do it. You don't complain, you just do it. And that works for you, and that is great. But we have like a whole range of different people, and we come to this in different ways. And so, yes, let's agree on what needs to happen. Let's make sure we're all aligned on that. But then we really need to think about the how is where we have room to bring a much greater group of people in who don't have to be motivated for the same reason you're motivated, but we need to
Mhm.
think about their motivation. And that we have room to to get what that to get what you want. We can get this done, but the how is going to matter, and that worth is worth getting some other viewpoints, because in some ways our culture is how do we know what to expect from each other,
Mhm.
how do we know we're respected, and how do we behave to each other in ways that we feel respected, and what that looks like is different for different groups of people. um, and it's also sort of how do we get ourselves to do the things we don't want to do? Like often we'll do something we don't want to do because it's a piece of the culture. And those are questions worth asking. So my thought is you don't have to tell the person we're not going to do it. It's more just like, no, we're going to need a lot of people to get this done. And so it makes sense that let's make sure it works for you, but we also need to make sure it works for other people.
Excellent. So, how to get people get a hold of Dr. Carla Fowler and learn more about what you do or even engage your services?
Yeah, great question. Well, an easy place to find me if you just want to follow along with more performance science is LinkedIn. So, great place to follow along. And I'm at Carla Fowler. And then a really good resource if you're interested in coaching or just learning more about it is my website. And that is thaxa.com. That's THAXA. I have a great FAQ. You can message me through the site. And I also have a lot of other talks or interviews that I've done are up on the site too, if you're just interested in checking that out.
Perfect. Well, thank you for putting up with a ton of questions. This has been marvelous.
I loved it.
Great to have you on the show.